All right, hello and welcome to the first Apigee AMA for 2023. My name is Cameron Pro, and I'll be your host from the Apigee product marketing team. I look after our Apigee community and how we can better educate, upskill, and make Apigee more accessible to our API practitioners. Today is our first AMA for the year. We'll be discussing how unmanaged APIs are hurting your productivity and security. Today, I'm joined by two of our product managers, Marsh Gardner and Tim Burks. So we'll go through a brief presentation and we'll welcome your questions. Marsh, take it away. Marsh, you're on mute.
There we go. How about that? Excellent. Somehow I got confused. Hi, good morning. Thanks for the welcome, Cameron. So you've already met Cameron. You've met me to some degree. I'm a product manager working on Apigee, and Tim is our tech lead. He's been my partner in crime in what we call API Hub and Registry. We'll be talking about that for a bit. I'm going to spend the next 15-ish minutes just giving an introduction to how we think about this space, and then we'll have questions for the rest of the session. But thanks for making time to be here today. So APIs over the last decade, they've been exploding, both internally and externally. And we've seen this seismic shift in digital experiences, especially the way we consume information too, and how we do business, and even something as trivial as placing a coffee order through your phone. Those are all digital interactions that are powered by APIs. And a study from Akamai a couple years ago showed that 83% of web traffic is processed by APIs. That's probably increased. And then we had a pandemic, and that changed a lot of what was normal, right? And so during this time, organizations really leaned heavily into digital and into APIs. And so we also know that over 80% of organizations reported an increase in efficiency from using APIs. And that's part of what's behind this explosion in the use of APIs in the last 2 to 3 years. There was a report recently from S&P Global Market Intelligence across 350 organizations that showed an over 200% growth rate in the adoption of APIs. So although APIs, they started as this connective tissue and middleware, they're a critical part, a key agent of digital transformation. And I find this is an interesting question to ask. How many APIs do you have in your company? And usually there's a level of uncertainty in the answers that I hear back. This is surprisingly hard to answer, just even knowing which APIs you exist. And if you don't know what APIs exist, you've got security risks, you've probably got divergence in styles and standards. And this is in part because the sprawl that's happened. API has been so successful, we're seeing these problems of abundance. Everything starting from like these high quality APIs that are discoverable, usable, up to date, well maintained and communicated around. But then there's this next category of these APIs that, they may be discoverable and documented, but it's less clear how well maintained or curated they are. And then you continue to strip away some of those qualities, maybe they're not up to date, or maybe you can figure out how they work, but they're not particularly well designed. And then at the very bottom, you've got these shadow APIs, the ones that are invisible because they aren't accounted for anywhere in the system. And those can't be easily discovered, and those are the scariest of all. And you're seeing this because there are also lots of clouds in play. Like many large enterprises are using multiple clouds. Or multiple API management tools. And so this just means that you have to assume in any large enterprise, there's going to be this heterogeneous environment across public and private clouds. One conversation I had with a customer really stands out to me, which is that they'd realized that they had 37 location APIs. And if you have 37 that you know about, what are the chances that they're actually 38 or even more? And that's the kind of problem you have when you're big, and two, you don't have one place where people can turn to with authority to find out what APIs exist or to register the APIs they're working on. So what do you do? Well, this is really how API management has shifted, right? This sprawl is making that a problem that we didn't have 10 years ago. Think studies that say that over 50% of enterprise APIs will go unmanaged by 2025. I believe that was Gartner. And we're also seeing a lot more in terms of breaches that are API based, and because if you're not securing those APIs, that's an attack vector. And when your APIs go down, that's a revenue impacting event. That downtime will cost money. So 81% of organizations said that 1 hour of downtime will cost them $300,000. And then there are divergences in styles for good reasons. And so there are good reasons why you might choose REST or GraphQL or gRPC or Async API, but they meet different use cases. I can see that in some of the questions that you all asked for the session. And they're in different cloud environments. So do you know what APIs exist in your enterprise? If yes, how are you tracking that and managing and protecting those APIs? One large mobile service provider we worked with quoted 15,000 APIs as a ballpark. And so this clearly is a problem, APIs sprawling across the enterprises. This all speaks to this need for a comprehensive governance across the lifecycle. So the first decade of API management was really focused on runtime governance. That was the story of API gateways and the emergence of that. And those have grown up a lot. They've matured. So when I talk about runtime governance, what I'm saying is how do you make sure you have the right policies implemented and a point of control that's enforcing that contract and entitlement. And then on the other side, there's design time governance. How do you standardize descriptions, the API design or standards and styles? How do you make sure that the policies are in place before APIs get to production and that the quality is high across teams? What are people doing? Well, the DIY solutions, a lot of this is deeply intertwined with your development culture. How do you build software in general? And then how do you make sure that the development workflows for your engineers make it easy to have APIs that are well designed and secure by default? And that's what brings us to the design time governance piece. Our answer is to get all your API information in one place so that you can govern them to consistent quality. This is really 3 parts that I'll be talking about for the next few minutes before we get to the question section. One, it's this universal catalog to build that consolidated source of truth. 2, that having all of that API information, specifically the formal descriptions of those API services, that enables you to manage your lifecycle of all your APIs across those stages, styles, and technologies and clouds. And 3, having that information in one place means you can use that to drive a bunch of tools based on open standards. And so we introduced what we call API Hub. It's based on an open source project called API Registry that is the system that manages that API metadata. And API Hub is this user interface you're seeing in a screenshot that surfaces that API information to people. So, like I mentioned, it's a universal catalog. It's a place to put all of your API specifications and API information in one place. Doesn't matter what protocol or style you're using, what gateway technology or cloud it's in. It's there in order to promote discovery. You end up with 37 location APIs because people didn't know probably about the existence of an API, and so they recreated it. And so the goal here is that by having all that API information in one place, you encourage that reuse and collaboration rather than duplication of effort, which is tremendously inefficient. And then when you get these large catalogs, it becomes super important. So when you think about public API programs, you're trying to reduce complexity. You're helping your developers understand what your API products are. And when you have API products that seem to do the same thing, that slows consumers down. Internally, though, there may be good reasons. There may be different departments that people are in, and they don't work well across the silos. Then that may just be the organizational reality. But the ability to understand at least what is there is a prerequisite for being able to encourage that reuse and efficiency. It's also, meant to support that lifecycle, those journeys, how an API evolves from concept and design through deprecation, retirement. By having this API information in one place, it gives the details that consumers need to understand and producers need to understand what these APIs are capable of doing. It enables you to have API the documentation in a consistent way, and it's you can see a glimpse of these lifecycle stages. How do you indicate to people at what stage of the lifecycle this API is in? And this again is a big difference between an internal and an external developer portal, if you will. So what isn't a developer portal? It's a place where APIs are discovered and adopted. And what's different about internal versus external, I could probably talk about for the whole time. But one thing in particular is that pre-production APIs are rarely shown externally. You may have a beta API, but that's usually running in production, in a production environment by the time it's available to external consumers. But internally, embrace the mess, right? This is, it's good to know which revision of the contract is in use in which environment as an API moves through its lifecycle. That's important. Having all this information enables applying these open tools and standards. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about, and we had a talk that's online if you're interested in seeing it, about API scoring at the API specifications conference last fall. But the idea here is, how do you measure the health of an API? And that's going to vary. No organization that I've talked to is exactly similar to how another one thinks about API health. And there are many, like, you're also not going to score the health of an API the same way if it's gRPC versus GraphQL or OpenAPI. Each of those have different tools and approaches. And so leveraging those open source tools in this highly variant landscape is important. So our goal here has been to give you a way in which to identify what's important to you in measuring API health, and then to surface that as a way to help guide behavior over time. So API Registry, I mentioned earlier, is this open source basis. That's where we began this journey to API Hub. It's an open source solution that manages the API metadata, and it can help drive events. So you can define, as I was just describing, how you score the health of your API. That, for instance, could be the linting rules, or you could have linting rules that essentially score according to your API design standards. And so when a new spec is pushed into Hub and Registry, that can trigger that linting run that reads the centralized definitions, gets those linting scores and results, and updates the scorecard so that developers can understand how the health has changed even over time. And all of this is really an effort to keep governance low friction for developers, and make it easy to do the right thing by default. So instead of these sort of stringent rules that feel like a burden, how do you empower development teams with the open standards and help them be aware? And often this includes components that aren't out of the box as tools. This is about culture and training in many ways too. If you have to have these strict approval processes, I mean, sometimes those are necessary, but the ability to self-service accelerates that, it reduces your time to market and accelerates the overall life cycle. When you have too many teams, each developing their own styles and standards, then you've got, there's less conformance across the portfolio. And so, how do you invite this participation from teams and collaborate around what that design standard is? And that's, I think, into the category of centers of excellence type approaches. And that brings me to the end of the formal presentation. We have a bunch of questions that came in, and I think, Cam, do we also have questions that are still coming in now live?
Yeah, we do. A few questions here. So the first one is, what type of API, whether it's REST or gRPC, is more suitable for voice, video, and SMS use case functionality?
Oh, I think I may have that one in the deck here. Hold on, because I think some of you sent questions in. Let me see if I can find that one. Actually, maybe I'll go here. Why don't we do this? First, I'll go through the ones that came in early, and then we'll take the live ones after. Sound good?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Cool. Someone asked, I have Apogee Edge. Can I still use API Hub? Short answer is yes. This is API Hub's in preview, and that's open to anyone who wants to provision it at this time. It is a core entitlement for Apogee X and hybrid subscribers, but we're also looking at ways in which we can extend that to others. If you have Apogee Edge, yes, you can still use API Hub. You have a little bit more work to do because your Apogee account is different than a Google account, but absolutely you can do this. So yes, the short answer is yes. Next, we have many of our APIs behind gRPC servers, all running on Google Cloud Run, defined by protocol buffers and implemented in Golang. This sounds like how Google might do some things. Which features of API Hub could potentially add value to our setup? Great question. Tim, my partner in crime, is probably better equipped than me to answer. Tim?
Yeah, thanks. So we built API Hub with gRPC. So we've used gRPC quite a bit and thought about how that would fit in the registry and hub. So we store really any type of API description in the hub, and that includes protos. Because protobuf APIs, gRPC, typically are described with multiple files. We store that group of files as a unit as the spec. So the spec is basically a collection of files that you compile to describe your API with protocol buffers. And once we have that in the registry, we can build all kinds of tooling on top of that, which I think these are leading to the kinds of features that add value. So things that once I've compiled the protos, I can generate a client library for that API, or server stubs, or mocks, or documentation. Some of these same things we do for OpenAPI, but actually with protocol buffers, in some cases, the tooling is better, and we get better results, like better clients and CLIs for gRPC APIs. And a lot of that's in open source projects associated with the registry. And I would really like to talk to anybody who wants to do gRPC design on the registry. I'd be happy to help.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Marsh, one quick question that just came in from the audience.
Yeah, sure.
How does this compare to Swagger Hub governance tools?
Cool. So I'm not an expert on Swagger Hub's governance tools, but I know a lot about OpenAPI in general. I think my first answer is that there's the Swiss cheese method that people apply to security, which is recognizing that every layer has weaknesses, and it's only in stacking a bunch of different approaches and layers that you get a more resilient solution. So my first answer is that you can have governance checks at time of authoring, which is what Swagger Hub is. That's what their first concern is authoring of API specifications. But you also want a general roll-up. You can't ensure necessarily that in a large enterprise everyone's going to be using the same tool. And so there are many ways to write specs, and checking that where you're authoring is definitely convenient. It's a good thing. And if you're using the same kind of open source tooling to apply those governance rules, we see a lot of Spectral. I'm not sure if Swagger Hub's using Spectral or if they have their own. But there are different ways and different tools you can use to apply and score and check these things. So I don't know. I need more detail on the question to answer it more directly, but hopefully that gives you an idea. There's one more piece worth calling out, which is that we built API Hub and Registry to be really agnostic of whatever description format you are using. So if you're talking gRPC, GraphQL, Async API, all of those work the same way in API Hub and Registry. We give you the hooks you need to drive those linting rules or other tools that you would use to score the health of an API. Tim, anything to add to this, or did I cover it?
I think that's great. Agnostic was really the word, like the key word. And even APIs that don't have API descriptions need to be listed somewhere. So that you can know where your problems are. And if you have an API Hub that's focused on a particular description format like Swagger, then you might have to have Swagger for an API. And we find a lot of people have APIs that have no description, and they need to work on them, but they don't know when they're going to get to it, and they just want to track what they do know about that API.
Yeah, I've even come across customers who, for reasons that were important to them, created their own description format. Google did this along the way. We had to, because there wasn't a standard in place at the time. But there may be good reasons to do that. First, I was surprised, but when they explained how they'd gotten to that point, it made sense to me.
Right.
So we couldn't, like, they have their own tools, and so we recognized that we're going to find some edge cases like that, and that's why we built this extensibility into Hub and Registry by default. Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
No, sorry to interrupt. So there are new formats emerging.
Yeah,
and we're ready for them. They're easy to hook in. We just have a MIME type that describes the type of the spec, and you can set that to whatever, and then drive your tooling based on that.
Actually, that leads right into the next question perfectly, which is, will Async API spec be supported? Well, yes, it's supported by design, right? So we built a system that expects to have artifacts that change over time that describe the surface of your API. Async API is one of those, for example. And so, yes, the same hooks that are there for applying this kind of linting, for instance, of an API specification, you could apply with Async API. What are your thoughts on over-management of APIs as related to clients having to update more frequently? Overwhelming them with versioning could yield to dissatisfaction. What is the solution to manage APIs without breaking clients and giving them that they are constantly being forced to migrate to newer versions? They're also resource constrained and have to evaluate trade-offs. I mean, this sounds like actually API, like the modern API management problems in a nutshell, right? This is if I understand the question correctly, versioning pushes burden onto consumers or clients in this case. How do you balance that? It's a trade-off. There's no silver bullet answer here. Keep it in mind. I mean, I think so. Let's see. When you have a small set of consumers, or if those consumers are internal, you may have more flexibility here. Like if you have a strictly internal API, then the company bears the brunt of those changes, both server side and client side. But the bigger the audience, the more stable you should aim to have your contracts. That when you break people, that's bad. Many people approach APIs as a job to be done. They have work that they need to done, and rather than do it themselves, they're going to outsource that to a system that provides an API. That's a great way to be more efficient and share in the work. But it's a trade-off, right? You're relinquishing control, but the promise is you do less of that work. You don't own that problem space. That lets you focus and concentrate. So good, but the bigger the audience, the more stable you should approach that contract, because many API consumers are going to treat this like an integration problem. They have this problem to solve. They want to do it once and not have to do it again. And when you break the contract, you force them to have to do work. And that's a time where you could lose them as a customer too. They may decide to choose another API because they're tired of updating every month. So it's trade-offs. This is a hard question. And I think if nothing else, this to me speaks to why it's really important to develop standard ways to build APIs and to invest in design and education so that you make fewer mistakes. So again, that's a trade-off. You can always do more design up front, but it reduces your agility. But that's a good thing. When you break people's clients, then that's a good thing. Anything to add, Tim?
Well, I think knowing what you're doing is important. Like if you're going to make a breaking change, you should know that it's happening. And the worst thing would be to have that get out and not realize. So having a record of your past API descriptions and being able to automatically check for breaking changes should be part of a flow for releasing APIs. We should be able to tell when we're making a breaking change and when not, and then we can enforce policies that say that within this level of versioning, we have no breaking changes. We shouldn't be relying. we wouldn't want to have to rely on manual verification of this. And we're talking about a registry and a hub that's a kind of a platform that enables these kinds of checks to be built. And we have some, and we're building more.
One more thing that stands out to me in this question that I think is really interesting and worth probing further is developer satisfaction. How are you even measuring that? I mean, I think this is really a general way, like, how do you not frustrate your consumers and disappoint them, right? But tools to measure dissatisfaction are tricky at the API level, and if you know good examples of people doing this well, or if you've tried this, then I'd love to hear about that. Next question. How do you choose between different types of authentication when requests will be between system to system or between client and backend? In this case, Apigee will be in the middle, and the type of auth. Oh, I see. The type of auth here that they're considering is basic auth or OAuth. So this isn't so much about the sort of API lifecycle and governance and managing the sprawl. It's really more API design, but I'll take a crack. So even the choice here, basic auth or OAuth, isn't quite the way I would think about it, right? There are different flows in OAuth that may be more or less appropriate. So if you're dealing with three people, so three-legged OAuth, then you've got the API provider who owns and operates the API. You've got the client application, that's the second party, and then you've got the user who's giving consent. So if you've ever used an app like Facebook or Twitter and you're authorizing another client to access your account, then you're granting permission. That's the consent-based flow for three-legged OAuth. So if you're thinking about what's the auth that you need, if it's user consent oriented, you want that authorization grant. Basic auth I hardly ever see anymore. I see API keys are often an easy way to do things, but the sort of more appropriate way to do this for service to service would be using the client credentials grant in OAuth. But if you're in a service mesh, it might be mutual TLS. So this is really, I think, an API design question specific to the authorization use case space. I don't know how to offer much more there. Tim, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's good. So why do we have, how does this hub fit into this? I think the type of authentication that we use should be audited and approved, and having it noted someplace lets that happen. It should exist, which is another thing you can verify. So I guess our perspective on this is that we want to make it easier to help people see what's going on and make sure that that's what you really want to have happening.
Yeah, great point. The thing about having, this is metadata, like to understand which APIs use what auth model really helps you understand your portfolio. So, it's also a thing you can flag. If basic auth is, is frowned upon in your organization, then having something like API Hub and a system where people can participate and understand that they've made a choice that doesn't conform, that's a good thing. Great point, Tim. What type of API, REST, gRPC, et cetera, is more suitable for voice, video, and SMS use cases or functionality? This is not in my core area of expertise. I think, I'd also look at WebRTC in this case. REST is, we're talking with voice and video, long pulling sessions. These are streaming type problems, and so REST is good for request response that are synchronous in that way, and for SMS might be appropriate. But I think what this really comes down to is, what do your consumers want? Who are you building this API for, and what are they going to find most useful? I mean, if you know your audience is people who prefer gRPC, then start writing some protos. So I think this really comes down to not what's more suitable, but what is the API you're building, who are you building it for, and what do they need? And perhaps you'll even consider multiple formats.
So can I add?
Yeah, please.
So as an engineer, if you have both ends, if you control the client and the server, I would strongly suggest looking at gRPC because it has a lot of support and structure and performance optimizations. And that adds some overhead because you have to, compile your protos and you go through a set of steps, but it means you don't write a lot of code that you're probably going to have to write if you use a REST API for this. As far as what's in the etc. box, there are other things that I think aren't as mature as gRPC, different messaging frameworks that might be simpler in some ways. Some of those appeared because people had some difficulty using gRPC, and gRPC has gotten easier to use. So I would say be sure to look at gRPC if you're doing these kinds of high traffic cases like seem to be described here.
Yeah, I guess I should start with the short answer, which is it depends, right? This is the classic "it depends" answer. What are you doing in other teams? Like, how do you, it's fine to experiment here and there with different API styles, but before you choose to make this an official standard for a large organization, be really mindful that that's going to bring a whole different set of tools and development approaches.
Right, and what do you expect your users to be able to do what skills do they have, and what environments do they work in? Like if they're writing, Flash apps, they probably can't use gRPC. So you have to think about that.
Flash apps. I haven't heard that name for a long time. All right. How does API security fit into the regulatory framework of the security control catalog? Sorry, this is not my area of expertise. How do you succeed at securing an API on GCP and show your work to federal assessment, FedRAMP teams, third-party auditors, I'm guessing, auditing organizations who demand physical artifacts, e-paper to meet compliance program objectives? This is a really specific question, and I can't say that I know the answer to this, but this might be an appropriate question for our community. We have a great community.apogee.com resolved to that. Cam, do you know? Anyway, we have a community for Apogee questions like this. Thanks. Yeah. Put it in the links. That's a great idea. That's the best thing.
Too. So if someone wants to talk about this, just ping us. I'm Tim Burks at google.com. So be interested in a conversation about this.
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you. It's that level of compliance and workflows is not my area of expertise. What are the best practices to sync between the data center or cluster and Apogee production to overcome the failover and make sure of high availability of all proxies and products and apps in the two clusters? I think, again, this is a good question for community. This isn't so much about, how do you manage a large portfolio and contain the sprawl? This is more about specific implementation questions for HA. So great question for community. Recommendations on how to manage a population scale video chat application using APIs. I don't know, this reminds me of that one we had earlier about what's the right style. Yeah, I think I'd have to ask a lot more questions to be able to have an informed opinion on this one. Population scale. I mean, Google's answer is Protos, right? We've got an opinionated toolchain and a way of building APIs that we open source as gRPC. That was, because at Google's scale, we really care about efficiency and performance. That's what we would do. But this, you might try this in the community as opposed to, I'm sure lots of other people have opinions, but I'm sorry I don't have better insight into that.
I think if we're talking about designing such a system, I'd want to prototype it. I have some scaffolding that helps me do that. That speeds me up. And there's going to be API design required here, like system design and API design. And if we can build things that help you quickly get like clients and mock servers, then you can explore, we can explore what these architectures would be like. I think what we're saying is we'd like to have a workbench for building APIs in particular styles, and we build that. That's the kind of thing that grows on a platform like we are.
Yep. I think that's all of the pre-submitted questions, and I think Cam, you called out the other one that came in during the session. Resources and what's next? The Apigee community. Oh, thanks. It's in the chat and also here on the slide. Great place to ask other questions or follow-up questions. We'll make sure to catch those when we can. The API Hub docs you can find here at this link. It's a great place to understand and learn more about how API Hub works and how to get started. If you have feedback on this event, we'd love to hear it. Hope you found it useful and interesting. If you have ideas, questions, please do let us know. That's why having that feedback really informs how we shape this session over time. And then, there are 2 other upcoming cloud events. There's the Cloud Financial Management, how to foster a FinOps culture. That's on Feb 21st. And on the 22nd, there's Sustainability and Green Ops with Google Cloud. Is there anything else to add to that? Yeah,
right. Thank you so much, Marsh. Yeah. Folks, we'll be sharing more on the AMA schedule for 2023 shortly. If you have any feedback, please give your feedback on what you liked, what you didn't like, how we can make it better, and the survey that goes out. I think that's it.
Great, and I put that back up again in case any of you wanted to grab that before we end. But thanks so much. Thanks, Cam, for having us. It's great to be here.
100%. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Marsh.
Thanks. Bye.